Mm. So, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Professor. As we were talking previously, on the 16th of September, we have held a webinar about Afghanistan after the Taliban returned to power, and it was hosted by our sector, private sector lead pillar, Mr. Omar Cradley, and presented by Mr. Hadi Habli, a political analyst and researcher on the Middle East affairs. Mr. Habli spoke about, his views about the implication of such a return from the perspective of the different regional superpowers, as I have said, like China, Turkey, Russia, the US, Europe, Iran, and so on. So today, if I may say, it will be a continuation of this series. It's only two, and it's an effort for widening our views about what is happening around, and which might have a future impact on the hydrocarbon industry in the East Med, from the perspective of the US foreign policy toward our region. And it's really an honor of hosting Professor Eugene Sensenig. Professor, correct me if I pronounce it well. Professor at the Faculty of Law and Political Science at NDU University in Lebanon. And he will try to take us through this complicated theme in a very short time, say 30 minutes, and by explaining to us its different aspect and face. The presentation, as I said, will be about 30 minutes, and there will be a QA session of 15 minutes afterwards. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's an honor to join you here today. What I'll be doing is to give sort of an overview of American foreign policy, briefly, so 5 to 10 minutes, and then try to show how American foreign policy is not exclusively governmental policy. And then in the second half, I'll try to show how this is impacted and how it will impact the post or the Taliban phase, and how that affects the Middle East. And I must say at the outset that I'm not totally neutral. I am a supporter of Joe Biden. I'm actually the chairman of the Democrats abroad here in Lebanon, so I'm sort of a little bit of a partisan person. Okay. So if there are any critical voices that I might be too optimistic, please tell me that. So okay. I'll open up the screen share and begin from. Are you seeing the?
Yes.
The entire screen now. Is it full screen? Yes. Okay. Good. So what I'd like to do now is show how American foreign policy has progressed. I'm also the head of the Publish What You Pay Student Society at NDU, which means we're working on the area of governance in the field of oil and natural gas. And what you see here, some of you might remember the New Jersey, which bombarded Beirut, which is sort of the war. And here we see the first attempt on the part of Wilson to steer a path of diplomacy between intervention and war. So this is an over 100-year tradition that the US has done at sometimes very successfully, at sometimes not so successfully, and then sometimes catastrophically. So it's the entire spectrum. I'm going to give you here a quote from Biden about the Biden doctrine. We've heard a lot of doctrines, starting with the Monroe Doctrine, the Truman Doctrine, the different doctrines. When asked about the Biden doctrine, he said, "My dad used to say to me, Champ, if everything is equally important to you, nothing is important to you." And he finishes up by saying, "Americans tend to over-respond to the wolf at the door without recognizing that there are other wolves in the field." And I think that applies not only to the US, but also to us today here in Lebanon, because a lot of people are thinking about the wolf at the door at the moment and asking, how can we talk about something as mundane as oil and natural gas governance when the country is falling apart. Well, I'm going to attempt to do that anyway, because there are many wolves out in the field, and some of them that are not talked about as much are systemic corruption, the culture of impunity, sectarianism, the patron-client system, the lack of social justice agenda. And I would say, many people say we have too much religion, or I would say maybe we don't have enough. I'll get into these questions at the end, but we have a lot of wolves at the door that people are not talking about, but they're the ones that really impact the extractive industry sector here in Lebanon.
Okay.
So the initial American approach over 100 years ago was to carry a big stick. Here we see Wilson with the olive branch, which is much too big for the pigeon, and he's taking out the big stick of Teddy Roosevelt, who famously said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And he was, as you can see, very much interested in the natural resources, but he was not the kind of person who would go out and attack countries. He would only do that as a last resort. And this is, I think, a policy that Biden is also reverting to. But Teddy Roosevelt was not without his interests in South America or the Middle East. As you can see, his policy was to keep the Europeans out more than to totally avoid intervention.
Okay.
As you can see here, in Roosevelt's policy in the Spanish-American War was to take not only Cuba and Puerto Rico, but also Hawaii and the Philippines. And here we see a cartoon at the time where the Philippines, Hawaii, and Cuba are celebrating Independence Day, American Independence Day.
Okay.
So American foreign policy is not totally altruistic, but it sort of goes back and forth between one, full hands-on occupation and aggression, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, splendid isolation. Here we see the period in the 20s and the 30s where the US tried to stay away from the problems that were brewing with respect to the Nazis and to the communists. And this is actually by Dr. Zeus saying, we're lucky that we're in a separate bed, and we know how that ended. So the US did learn its lesson after World War II. It learned its lesson because of fascism and the war, but also because of Stalinism and the Soviet threat. So I want to give a very brief example of how the US can get it right, because US occupation is often seen as something negative, but they got it right, or we got it right, being an American, after World War II with 4 countries: Japan, Germany, Austria, and Italy. So first of all, Japan was occupied between 45 and 52, together with the British. And with the Marshall Plan, the US actually helped Japan back on its feet. And Japan is, of course, a role model today because of the very, very effective American occupation policy. But of course, allowing Japan then into independence. As you can see here, Korea at the time was a part of Japan, as was Taiwan. These were then given to China and to the Americans and to the Soviets. That led to the war, of course. But the war and the occupation of Japan is a role model of well done American occupation. Here we see the American occupation zone. Here I've put in the map, they put the American zone of Germany and Austria together. Here's the Russian zone, etc. And in this period, the US really got it right again in Europe. And I'm not going to go into details if anybody has any questions about, I did my PhD thesis on the US occupation of Austria. This is the American zone. Of course, the division of Germany was not intended, but the German success story is largely because of American occupation. Italy was only occupied shortly from 43 to 46. Again, a very successful example of American and British occupation. It does work when done correctly. And finally, is it moving? Did the slide move? Finally, the Austrian example. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. This is the case I know the best. Austria, again, was like Germany, divided up into 4 zones. And why did this work? Because of the logic of the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan linked very successful economic investments with military occupation. And I just want to juxtapose this to the the disasters that the US incurred in other parts of the world, especially Vietnam, which everybody knows about, but also Korea. And Biden is, here we see, not, Roosevelt was talking about speaking softly and carrying a big stick of diplomacy. And there's Trump speaking loudly with a very tiny stick, because in the end, he didn't have much to show for himself. The Marshall Plan between 46 and 52 laid the foundation for the European Coal and Steel Agreement. And the European Coal and Steel Agreement is what turned Europe, Western Europe, into the European Union. So this was a massive success. I won't go into the details, although I'd love to. The Marshall Plan between 48 and 52, many European countries, and here we see the integration of Europe. The integration of Europe was caused by the United States. Without the United States, it would not have worked. And the US paid for it. The US paid for funding reconstruction with American goods and American raw materials. And this worked well because the US had an overabundance of this material at the time. And so without American investment, massive investment, it wouldn't have worked, but it was what brought the Europeans together. It was learning from the mistakes of World War I and the interwar period. And by 52, the European countries were better off than they were in 39 before the war started. Just as these are the countries that got Marshall Plan aid. And I won't go into details. If anybody wants to juxtapose American occupation of Europe and Japan with Afghanistan, we can do that. Okay, Biden's doctrine in the Middle East. Will it lead to the tragic failures in Vietnam and Nicaragua and Chile example, or will it copy the role model of the Marshall Plan? Now, what we have to know is that the US had a huge incentive at the time. The US had an overabundance of resources, which it was easily able to give to Europe at the time. So that's one thing that's missing at the moment, the cash flow. But the commitment, I think, is more important. If the US is committed to a region, then it works. If the US is not, and I don't think that the Afghanistan model was because of a lack of commitment, because 20 years is a long time. Now I want to talk about the global presence and say that it's more, because when you're looking at Lebanon, and I've been in Lebanon now for 22 years, the US global footprint is also about business. American businesses in the region and American civil society. But it's also about global mobility, not only Lebanese going to the US or people from the Middle East going to the US, but vice versa. This give and take has a huge impact. The Lebanese Americans or the Lebanese living in the US play a big role in US foreign policy. But we also have Americans living in Lebanon, which I'll talk about, like myself. I am not only the founder of the Democrats Abroad. A good friend of mine, Reed Clark, is the founder of the Republicans Overseas. We were both here about the same time, around 2022. He's been here 25 years. I also founded the Lebanese Immigration Research Center, where I'm working on the Lebanese diaspora, together with a colleague. So we have this two-sided stereo effect, if you will. And I don't think that you can understand American foreign policy without looking at the Americans and the Lebanese on both sides of the Atlantic. Very important are the schools and universities, the healthcare system, the transportation. The harbor was partially built by the Americans, but much larger by the role was played by the French and by the British. The railroads along the coast were built by the British. Businesses and churches, not to forget. So there's the presence of the United States in Lebanon is very, very multifaceted. Let me see. Yes, okay. Also, the role of religion. The far right and mainstream Protestant evangelical Zionists are known that they play a big role in American foreign policy. But I would like to point out that both Joe Biden and John Kerry are progressive Catholics, and they're following the tradition of Catholic social teaching, which I hope will play a role in their foreign policy. I know it does for John Kerry. And we're working here at my university at NDU on Catholic social teaching and interfacing with some of the people in the Biden administration, trying to bring in the logic of social justice into the extractive industry sector. I mentioned the role of the diaspora, the increasing footprint of the digital nomads. COVID gave us a huge gift. I mean, a lot of people suffered, and I've lost family members to COVID-19, direct family members. However, the advantage is that we are now much more interlinked than we were in 2019. There's a lot of Lebanese, Syrians, Palestinians in the US. And this is a long tradition. The founding of countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia have a lot to do with their respective diasporas in the United States. And we know that the Lebanese diaspora plays a big role. Similar to the case in Central Europe. And we're working on a project comparing the Middle East to Mitteleuropa, which is the German word for Central Europe. The two experiences, Middle East and Central Europe, if anybody's interested in that comparison. Now let's get to one of our favorite American diplomats, Amos Hochstein, who is an Israeli, but he's part of the Israeli diaspora in the US. So we see this coming and going. He's the man who's now negotiating for Anthony Blinken for the water, the sea border between Lebanon and Israel. He's an American. He was born in Israel. His parents were Americans. He migrated back. And as far as I can tell, he's playing a relatively even-handed role, but he does have a strong rooting in the Middle East. And we'll have to watch him because he's going to be one of the men who's going to be playing a big role in trying to talk sense to both sides. And I think both sides need a little bit of coaxing with respect to the sea border. I want to go now into some of the organizations, if anybody's interested. If you want to leverage American foreign policy in the MENA and in Lebanon, here are some of your options. There are the Republicans overseas. We have had the right to vote since 1973 in the US. The Lebanese just got that 4 years ago. But this is something that I can tell you about. I've been working on overseas politics. So the Republicans abroad, the Democrats, Republicans overseas, the Democrats abroad. The two parties have developmental foundations, the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, both very active. And I know that the IRI is very active in the area of oil and natural gas. And both of them in Lebanon are headed by people who have a diaspora experience on both sides of the pond. And finally, some of the think tanks, which I'll go into in a moment as well. For example, the National Endowment for Democracy. So this is a picture of yours truly. This is back in 2008, Democrats abroad and the Republicans overseas. We shouldn't forget that there are 120,000 US citizens in Lebanon. With the exception of around 3,000, all of them are hyphenated Lebanese. All of them are Lebanese who lived in the US and came back, or their spouses, or their children. But that's a large number, and that's a lot of votes, as well as the possibility of leveraging Congress and leveraging the State Department. And I'm working on that a little bit with some of the friends in the different oil organizations. Republicans are also important in this respect. The IRI and the NDI, these are the developmental branches. They follow actually the role model. Some of you are familiar with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation or the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Heinrich Böll, etc. The Americans set them up in Germany with Marshall Plan money. They were so successful that the US copied this role model, and the IRI and the NDI are now very active, and the IRI is active in the oil and gas sector here in Lebanon. So that's another way to leverage American foreign policy. These are three organizations: the National Endowment for Democracy, which is more of an umbrella organization. And then we have one for the business sector and one for the labor union sector. This will be important once we start drilling and start actually manufacturing petroleum products. It will be the organization of the petroleum sector by the labor unions. But back when we had two oil refineries, one in Saida and one in Tripoli, there were very strong labor unions back in the 50s and 60s. That most likely will be coming back. So these are our three organizations which are important. And of course, nobody should forget the USAID, the big American aid organization. Now, let's look at Friedrich Holth. And we all know Friedrich Holth.
Professor, I have a slide between brackets here, so that we can continue forward. As a Lebanese, I don't want to be seen as ultra-nationalist, you know. As a Lebanese national, I love my country. I love its interest and so on. How can I connect the idea of me as a Lebanese person, as Lebanon interest, with the interest of I cannot compare Lebanon with the U.S., but in a sense that the U.S. relations is always based on interest.
Yeah.
So how can I match these two?
How can you align your interest with the interest of the Americans in Lebanon?
Exactly. That's it.
Well, if you will, if I may go back to these party organizations, these are Lebanese, almost 90%.
Okay.
All of these people have votes.
Okay.
What you have to realize is, and I think that some people get this wrong, there is no such thing as the American foreign policy. We're seeing this very strongly with Trump versus Biden. And the people on the Biden team for the Middle East, they come from the Obama administration. Both Hof and Hochstein. Hochstein especially, he was very strong in the Obama administration. But so there is a big difference now, and it's becoming bigger and more profiled between the two sides. Here you see, of course, the Republicans, but I think this is very important, the industry interests and the labor interests. There's a lot, these are not, you don't play one off against the other, if you will, but the opportunity to become influential through facts and through lobbying, through the Lebanese American citizens here, but also through these NGOs is being underestimated by Lebanese. And I'll get to this in a moment. I think the US has a genuine interest in Lebanon working. And so those few people who actually think that Lebanon can function properly given the right environment will be met with open ears. So I think that once you understand how American foreign policy works, that it's not one monolithic thing, which I think you all obviously know, but others, then there's a much greater chance to leverage American foreign policy. And I want to get into the Hof line now, because Friedrich Hof is the one who gave the line, the Hof line, its name. And it's still in negotiation. And Friedrich Hof is not a nobody. Friedrich Hof used to work for the Rafik Hariri Center for Middle Eastern Studies. So here we see a very clear link, and it's in the middle, and this center is run by the Atlantic Council. And this Atlantic Council was set up in '61 to carry on the logic of the Marshall Plan. So here we see the Marshall Plan logic linking with the Hariri Center for the Middle East very nicely. And this is about long-term sustainable development. So, and I like this issue because the Atlantic Council and Atlanticism is about proactive integration and about working together. And the European Coal and Steel Agreement was set up for that specific reason. Now, Friedrich Hof, as I said, is the former director, and he worked for a while for the Rafik Hariri Center in the Middle East. And here we have the two logos. This is the one, and guess who's paying for this? Baha Hariri. And she has so much influence that when the director of the center criticized the Egyptian government for removing Morsi, Baha Hariri had the director of the institute removed. So that's how much influence the Hariri family has on the Atlantic Council. So it's a two-way street. So if they can do it, I think that we need to mobilize as well. I just wanted to bring this up. Now, what did Biden say about the Biden doctrine? Because we're now in the Biden world. We're away from Trump, which was the disaster. I think most people would agree. Even my friends in the Republicans overseas in Lebanon agree with that. He said we need to work on uniting the Western Hemisphere, working with our partners in Asia, and on other issues such as climate change and terrorism. But he said this back in 2016 when he was leaving the White House. So this is the same Biden. This is the same Biden with decades of security and international experience. And so, and don't forget, he's a professing and very profound Catholic and a supporter of Catholic social teaching and social justice. And I think here we can also leverage American foreign policy. He's an idealist to a large extent, as opposed to a realist, but he's very much into the big stick as well. In the end, he does have teeth. His foreign policy does have teeth. And we saw that with the Obama administration. So what is the American big stick and where is it going? Let's have a look at Afghanistan. The Americans, a lot of people say the Americans were in Afghanistan for many reasons, but one of them was the natural resources. Personally, I don't think that played much of a role. I don't think that this was also the reason that you asked me to speak about this, that the Afghani natural resources play a role. However, they do play a role in one area which is similar to Lebanon, and that is the resource curse. Countries that are corrupt, as we can see, Afghanistan definitely was and most likely will remain, natural resources make the country much, much worse. And that was the reason for my title. The resource curse is a phenomenon in countries based on a culture of impunity. And we all know that the corrupt leadership in Lebanon is going to become much more corrupt if we continue along the road. And this is what I would say was the one parallel between Lebanon and Afghanistan. Now, as far as our situation here, I think one of the big issues that I know, because I've been contacted by a lot of people in the oil and gas sector as the head of the Democrats abroad, how can you help us leverage the Biden administration? I mean, they were my friends during the Trump era as well, but now since we're back in the White House, they're much more interested. And I think there are some possibilities. The Hof line is called the Hof line because of Friedrich Hof, and he worked together in the Obama administration with Hochstein, and Hochstein is now the chief negotiator. He's a very strong realist, but he's part of very, very well integrated into the Biden team. So I think that we should be looking at how do we avoid the culture of impunity? How do we avoid the research curves? And how do we deal with the other wolves? And I don't want to talk about the wolf of today. I want to talk about the other wolves, like gender equality in the oil and gas sector. Women today are banned from working in the oil and gas sector by law. There is very little as far as ecological sustainability, rule of law. There's very little on the decentralization of infrastructure, very little of evidence-based just governance mechanisms in the sector. I want to talk about confessionalism because what they're planning on doing is dividing up the entire oil and gas pie from the different sections of the gas fields to the jobs according to sectarian lines. And finally, the faith-based approach, where I think we can also link into the Biden White House. So first of all, this picture here, and there's a lot of women in that picture, as you can tell. But we found out that there are women working on the Tungsten Explorer. They just didn't get in the picture. And promoting women in STEM is something that is really key for foreign donors, STEM being science, technologies, engineering, and maths. So I think that the gender gap in our sector, this sector, is very important. Then the alternative energy mix. Here we see the USAID again, promoting solar energy. The US is interested in a smart mix, and the Biden administration is strongly promoting this. So anybody who wants to stay with the old sector, oil and gas, but look into the modern sector with the United States and with the USAID, I think they'll find an open door in the American embassy. And now I want to come back to somebody who I think Lebanon can be really proud of, because you asked, what can we do? Fuad Shahab got it right. And Fuad Shahab is also based on the traditions of Catholic social teaching. He brought in Louis-Joseph Lebré. And Louis-Joseph Lebré created the IRFED plan, which was implemented to an extent by Fuad Shahab. Evidence-based development. The Kamal Ataturk, or Juan Perón of Lebanon, and he got it right, but he stayed in power much too shortly. So here are some traditions that we can link into. And then I said at the beginning, much religion in Lebanon, we don't have enough. And what do I mean by that? Sectarianism is taking the existing, as we saw today, taking the existing differences based on religion and abusing them to cause problems, abusing them to exploit people and oppress people. Confessionalism is normal. Confessionalism is something we have to embrace. And what's missing in our dialogue on oil and natural gas and the culture of impunity and ethics in the sector is our respective religious faith. Whether it's Christianity or Islam, we have strong traditions about business ethics, which we're not bringing into the mix. So I just wanted to give this example from the Netherlands, where they have the pillars similar to Lebanon, but what we see the difference between the Netherlands and Lebanon, it all comes together at the top. So those in the audience who are looking towards federalism, is it going to come together at the top like it does in other countries or not? And some of the other issues, along with energy, is transportation and food. And these are some other examples that I just want to say where the US is very active. This is the Fair Trade Initiative, strongly supported by the State Department in agriculture. Wrapping it up, looking at Lebanon in context, I just want to say one last thing, that we have strong faith traditions. This is just one example that we did at our university with the Publish What You Pay organization. We are using the traditions of the Catholic saints in the oil and gas sector, Saint Barbara, but also Saint Daniel, to show that there's a long tradition of religious dedication to values in our sector. And this is being totally ignored. None of the parties, I was just talking to one of my graduate students, none of the parties in Lebanon are dedicated to social justice and rule of law, really, the way they are in here. And finally, I just wanted to say one thing, and this is a poster that I made myself. You know the old, this is not that Lao Tse, but it's attributed to Lao Tse. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. But don't forget to teach him about the monopoly rights in the fishing industry. I think that what we're seeing is a shift away from a purely corporate focus during the Trump years. Biden is a strong supporter of the labor unions. He comes from a union family. His father was a worker. And he never tires of bringing up this issue of labor and industry. So I think what I'm trying to say here is there's a very wide variety of options of linking into American foreign policy. I don't think that the US is that much interested in what's happening today. They're taking that as a given. But I think Lebanon remains one of the countries which the United States thinks could work. And I think that's where we have to start our attempts to influence American foreign policy. So thank you very much. And I will take this down if I...
Thank you, Professor.
Yes.
I will now open the floor if anyone has a question. Anyone has a question, Bassam?
Yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
And thank you so much for taking us into this really nice, let's say, backing of values, of American values that we can apply here locally in our society. I just need to get your feedback on the general alignment of the American interest towards Lebanon versus Israel. We're like, obviously, Lebanon is an area of interest for the United States, but not at the expense of Israel. We do have some sort of a sibling effect, and even like bringing up the Hoffline proposition has came down to be perceived by the Lebanese side some sort of being biased more toward Israel, considering the economic resources that are being granted by the Hoffline to the Israeli side as compared to the Lebanese side. And even, let's say, we're not 100% sure being able to prove it, that it's Lebanese, let's say, according to the rule of law, but just the idea of being able to shed a doubt on the Hoffline by itself gives a full leverage to the Lebanese side to try to negotiate better and to gain more area, and it's all coming down to economics, and it's all coming down to the benefits of the Lebanese people. I don't want to say it's going to have like at the expense of the other side, and just trying to be objective here. And I do understand that that even if we took the bigger bite as Lebanese people, it's not going to go to the people. It might go to the politicians because we're a corrupt system. But also, two wrongs doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
So first, we need to address the issue of the resources curse by removing the elite, like you mentioned, and it's a long way due by the Americans or the Western world having allowed them to stay that long to rule the country. But also, we need to be fair regarding the details of approaching the negotiation to get the resources underneath the water, to allow my population, my country, to gain what we can do extra, because they're way much needed right nowadays than they used to be 10 years ago.
Well, I think Friedrich Hall used to work for a Lebanese funded research center. He's not anti-Lebanese. Hariri was paying his salary. So I think we should know that. And we should know he has an open ear. And when I was doing the research for this presentation, I found an oral history interview with him where it stops in 2008, but he talks about how as a student, he spent a semester in Damascus in the 60s, and how he was later in Lebanon, and how he really likes Arab culture. So I think we have to do the same thing the Israelis do, is to take the time to get to know these people and to use, I mean, we talk about the Israeli lobby in the US. Why isn't there an Arab lobby in the US? There are as many Arabs and Muslims put together. There's more Arabs and Muslims in the US than there are Jews.
No, I understand. My approach is going I'm sorry, Robert, just one comment, I promise. My approach is going from the, I do understand Mr. Hoff and the background of Mr. Hoff, and I do totally respect his objectivity and professionalism in terms of proposing something, because he's seeing things from the outside. He's proposing a solution that could work for both sides.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I do have also a non-biased, non-sectarian institute in Lebanon, let's say, which is the Lebanese army, that's telling me, based on international law, you are allowed to a much more bigger
This
area.
is exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Exactly. So
you
are allowed by international law access to get more to your people, an extra area. And I do understand in international politics, it's going to come down to negotiation, but setting the benchmark at the Hoff line at the moment, while you think you have like legal arguments or legal justifications to negotiate on an extra. Thank you so much.
I won't mention any names, but I'm a member of an organization which is called the Academic Forum Beirut Berlin, because I got my PhD in Austria, and there's a lot of German graduates who are engineers, and they convinced me, along with members of the Lebanese army, that the Lebanese position is justified. I think it's justified, but that's the whole point. I think it's justified, and I think that 120,000 American citizens in Lebanon, and I don't know how many million Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in the US cannot get the ears of the American diplomats, then there's something wrong.
Yeah,
I think we need
this area. This area should be more focusing on it, lobbying and so on.
I've been the head of the Democrats Abroad for a long time. I founded it in the year 2000. And when we won the first time with Obama back in 2008, and we worked on a redrafting of the Bush foreign policy, our neighbors to the south from the Democrats Abroad, they got all bent out of shape. Who do you think you are trying to influence the Democratic Party from a Lebanese perspective? And then they wanted to teach us how to do it. They thought somehow we were Palestinians or something. I don't know. You can't treat us that way. We wouldn't even sit on the same table with them because we're not allowed to. So when we had our meetings in Europe, the Democrats Abroad Lebanon would not sit on the same table as the Democrats Abroad Israel because we're not allowed to. And they filed a complaint, and we said, we'll go to jail if we do that. So the Israelis are doing this well. We're doing a lousy job. And the second thing I would like to say,
but Professor, we are talking about rights here. This is our right.
I agree with you. I agree.
Our right.
International law. It's not about right. It's about law.
Yes,
International,
about law.
which
The
is
law
supposed to be upheld by the Americans. So that's why I need to see a way to show it. I wouldn't say in their face, but like just to come. I mean, like if they're preaching about the rule of law, there you go.
The arguments are going to be well presented on both sides, and then it comes to leveraging. And that's where the behind the scenes action takes place. And I would say that because the Lebanese case for the sea border is a strong case, as you say yourself, it's not whether we have the good arguments, and I'm saying we because I support these arguments too. It's whether we can get to the halls of power and start convincing people to take this seriously. And I don't think it's a lost cause. I do not think it's a lost cause. Okay. I do think that Hochstein can be convinced, at least to hear our side. But they will only do it if the Lebanese diaspora in the United States and the Lebanese voters here start getting their act together. Because the Israelis know how to play that game. And we're not playing it very well. I hope someone
is listening. I hope someone is listening right now.
No, I can offer my good services.
You got us all fired up, Bian, to do something. If you feel that you show us the way, and what would you do? Like, look at the Israeli. I don't know, like if you know. I'm sure you have an insight on the Israeli team, how they're working in terms of leveraging, and how are they doing it?
Well, I don't have any direct. I don't have any direct insight. If I did, I wouldn't tell you. but I don't. But I can imagine what they're doing. They're using their look. The head of the Democrats, the head of the Republicans abroad is married to a Lebanese. I'm married to a Lebanese. We're on the Lebanese side. And I saw this, as I said, in 2008 when we started, because we were very big at the time. We had several hundred members in Lebanon because a lot of people had come for the reconstruction of Lebanon after the war in 2006. And so in 2007, the Democrats abroad was very strong. We really fired up because of Obama. And it was a very large organization. It was nearly as large as the Israeli one. And we had a voting member from Lebanon in Denver at the Democratic Convention. That was the first time in the history of the Democrats abroad, because we are an official part of the Democrats abroad as opposed to the Republicans. We have votes in the convention. And so for the first time, someone from the Middle East too was there who wasn't Israeli, and they couldn't take it. And we were also very happy about this. And a lot of other people were happy about this too. So there is a lot of interest, but we have to play that. And I think Lebanese are very good at playing this political game in the United States on other issues. So we have to do it on this issue too.
Okay.
Is there a roadmap for it, or like is there a plan or a contact, or is there some sort of a research and preparation to be able to do this outreach to the US?
I'm already working with some of my. Go look up the Akademisches Forum Berlin Beirut, Academic Forum Berlin Beirut.
Okay.
Try to find out who the members are. Try to find out who in that organization is in oil and natural gas, and you'll know who I'm working with. Okay. But I'm not going to say it here. But we're already doing this, but behind the scenes. And if anybody wants my support, I am on the Lebanese side, of course. As an American citizen, I want the American government to be fair in this region. Exactly. I think that's only good for the Israelis, because then they can stop acting like babies and start acting like adults. Because if the stronger Lebanon is, the more Israel has to become mature, which is not a bad thing.
I think if they're acting like parental a bit with the Lebanese side, because the Lebanese side never acted as an adult. So
exactly,
it's maybe our turn now to step up, to do our part, and to bring some maturity to the table in terms of addressing the issues. And that's why deep down, I believe that building the arguments where we come from on solid legal ground rather than just argumentative to or that at least will give you, based on principles, let's say the principle of the rule of law, will give a big leverage in terms of being able to.
That's the point I was trying to make. the Biden administration is, first of all, no, I think it was Churchill who said, great powers do not have friends, they have interests. So the American foreign policy will always be interest-based, first and foremost. But some presidents and some administrations are more principled than others. Trump was not principled. Biden is. Biden is very principled. And I think
so
he's
you are
also,
saying,
yes.
so Professor, you are saying that we have a chance here to leverage.
I'm absolutely, look, I'm not saying any secrets here that the Lebanese diaspora in the United States is very influential in American foreign policy in security related issues. And they've gotten a lot done. Now, could we do the same thing in the oil and gas sector? I think yes.
Okay. All right.
And by the way, I think that would be non-sectarian, because the other one is sectarian. But the oil and gas sector will only work if we focus on rule of law, and if we focus on issues like gender and ecology and the impact on local communities. I still believe, although I started working on this topic several years ago, I was much more optimistic, but I'm still optimistic that the oil and gas sector could be the last hope for Lebanon.
All right.
As long as we take out this curse of resources. So I'm sorry, one last question. So Eugene, Dr. Eugene, regarding the, your
Can we be first name? Robert,
okay.
Tell him to be first name.
Eugene,
Yes, Bassam.
I'm Bassam. I'm really happy that you joined from NDU. So like, this is my university.
Oh, okay.
So like, regarding, I really like your upholding of the Democrats' value in terms of like gender equality and all these values. Do you think they will continue to stand within the foreseen future, which is going to be more focused on sustainability, and the whole rhetoric is going to move more towards sustainability and energy transition, rather than focusing on women economic empowerment and say gender equality? And because like the whole world now is moving into more survival mode, and the whole rhetoric of discussion is going to move more towards sustainability. Do you think these values are going to continue within the foreseen future?
Well, I've never seen a green movement that was sexist. I mean, okay, all of us guys are somehow a little bit sexist. But the green movement and the ecology movement and the sustainability movement is a holistic movement. That's the whole rationale behind it. So whether it's the issue of transportation, whether it's the issue of the extractive industries, whether it's the issue of education, you name it, there's an attempt to see things in a holistic way, which from the different sides. Today we use the term intersectionality. So I would say that the sustainability discussion in the COP meeting in Glasgow, this is going to give other issues like gender and workplace equality and fairness in the workplace a push. I think it's going to go actually in the opposite direction. I think it's going to get better because of this.
Okay.
Fantastic.
All right. That's good. Is there anyone who have a question before we close?
And I would just want to say,
yes.
Robert,
yes, Prof.
Anybody who's directly interested in using the leveraging of my few resources in this area, okay, you can give them. I mean, you know the people who you can. You can give them my contact coordinates. I'll be very glad to do this.
Yeah, okay. We are a group of 600 plus professionals. Really, we were hoping, and we still hope that this industry will be kept a bit aside of, you know, this minor debates of politics, minor politics, and so on.
Can I give you one example?
Yeah.
In the law, in the Labor Code of 1946, it says that women are banned from mining and from heavy machinery, which is drilling platforms. In the Transparency Act of 2018, there's a clause for equal opportunity in the workplace and diversity management. When asked about this, the various players in the Lebanese government said, yeah, equal opportunity and diversity for the confessional side of things. Not for women, not for disabilities, not for foreigners, blah, 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 just for they want to sectarianize workplace equality. So they're trying their darndest to ruin this. The good thing is the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the EITI, is linked to CEDAR, the CEDAR agreement. So because we're becoming oil exporting, we cannot goof off like this. And if we lose the EITI accreditation, we're going to lose CEDAR. We're going to lose foreign donors. This is one thing that no one's talking about, is that the foreign aid is linked to the EITI membership. It's not membership, but the EITI entry. And we're negotiating this right now. So this is a big chance as well to leverage the situation.
Okay.
Wow. A lot of things on the table.
Yes, I mean, it's promising. I mean, it's a horrible time to be in Lebanon, but there's still hope.
There's still hope, and this is what we base our our hope on. Anyway, Professor, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was an honor, really. You shared with us your perspective, and we hope that things will go well for us as Lebanese, and everything will get into order. Always from chaos there is order at the long term. Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you, Professor, once again. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.